So I have the great pleasure of hosting this panel. But first, I want to show you a little bit of what his career, besides the X-File, has been. So, Roy, can you?
Arthur Dale's former special agent with the Bureau. I need to ask you some questions about...
Do you know what an X-File is?
It's an unsolved case.
No, it's a case that's been designated unsolved.
Talking earlier about how we write funny things together. Kurt Loda, who's a fan from Italy, and I came up with this ones. All hail his grace, Franklin of the House Spotnitz, first of his name, king of the Oreos, fanboys and fangirls, lord of the ship, and protector of the files. Here's Frank Spotnitz. I would like to clarify something because it might come on our conversation. I've been working for Frank since 2015 as his social media manager. It's kind of like, and so we share a lot of time together. So if at some point something gets lost in translation, please ask. So I would like to talk a little bit about how you came to be into this world. So you were born in Kansama, Japan, in November 17, 1960.
That's right.
So how was Frank the kid? What were your favorites?
So my dad was in the Army, so I moved around a lot the first 7 years of my life, and I think I turned to television as continuity. So I watched a massive amount of television and movies as a child, which, as it turned out, ended up being a great career training. But the stuff, I watched everything. I was completely indiscriminate, but the stuff that stayed with me the longest were things like The Twilight Zone and the original Star Trek, Wild Wild West, Mission Impossible, shows like that. But what I realized later on in life is that some shows, they nourish you more. Like you watch a show and you enjoy it, but some shows, like, they have like nutritional content. They're about something. they're teaching you something about life in a way. And when I started writing for the X-Files, which was my first job in Hollywood, it occurred to me pretty quickly, I want this to be about something. I want people to feel like there's something to think about after the show is over. And I started to realize like the best episodes were like that. And the episodes that weren't so good, they were just kind of thin. Like they may have diverted your attention for an hour, but they didn't leave you with much to chew on. And so I think back to my childhood a lot. I like to have a story that that stayed with me. And how do I create stories like that now?
I'm gonna pause for a second because we're having a technical issue. Hold on.
I'm turning blue.
Yeah, but my next question that you can answer while you fix this is that of the experience of traveling around, what of those experiences shaped you as a writer?
Gosh, I think traveling around, your social connections are formed and then broken up repeatedly, so you are forced to become self-reliant. And I also think you feel a bit of an outsider. And I've continued this pattern of traveling around. I've lived in Europe for the last 9 years. It's become part of me, the sense of traveling, discontinuity, being an outsider, looking at the world as if you don't belong, which I'm very comfortable in that position, actually. I don't like being part of a group. I find it very hard to be part of something organized. But I think that's a helpful thing for a writer, is to be able to look, to observe. Probably spend a lot of time in my own head. But like Man in the High Castle, I think I was able to write that because I was living outside the United States when I was asked to write it, and it gave me a perspective on my own country that I don't think I would have had if I hadn't been moving around.
I want to draw this back a little bit to the X-Files. You mentioned that X-Files was your first job right after AFI, because he went to American Film Institute and he graduated from screenwriting in '91. And so, what do you think that it was that Chris saw in you to make him to decide that you were his sort of right hand in so many things?
Yeah, I was so fortunate. I'd been a reporter, and after 7 years of doing it, I just realized I don't love this enough to do this the rest of my life. I'm never going to be that great at it because I don't love it. And really what I wanted to do was write movies, but I was afraid. I thought it'd be too hard. I thought the business would be too brutal. I just said, the hell with it. I've got only one life. I've got to try and do this. So at the time, I was a reporter in Paris. And I moved back to LA, went to the AFI, as Avi said. And as soon as I moved back, I was invited to join a book group. And in that book group was a guy writing TV movies for Disney named Chris Carter. And I was in this book group with him for 2 years, and we read classic books you should have read in high school or college, but didn't. And then the book group ended. I graduated film school, and one night I was at a party actually with my film school buddies, and the TV was on, and I go, oh my God, that's Chris Carter's name, and it was the X-Files, and it was the premiere. I was at a party the night of the premiere, and I didn't even know the show was coming on or that he created it. And so I sat at the party watching the episode instead of talking to people. And then I kept watching it all that season. And toward the end of the first season, a friend of mine that I'd grown up with in Phoenix, Arizona, called me and said, he's living in LA just like me, trying to make it as a writer. He said, don't you know this guy, Chris Carter? I said, yeah, we were in a book group a couple years ago. And he goes, well, I want to pitch him some episode ideas. Will you call him for me? Wow, this is really awkward because I haven't called Chris myself, and now I'm going to call to ask a favor for somebody he doesn't know. But I had known this guy since I was 10 years old. I said, okay, I'll do it. So I called Chris. He took my call, and I said, I have this friend, and he said, no, I won't hear his ideas. But you, Frank, if you have any ideas, I'll hear yours. Now, this is how smart I am. It never occurred to me that I should pitch. I wanted to be a writer. I'm desperately trying to figure it out. I don't think to call Chris Carter myself. So I'd watched every episode, so it wasn't that hard for me to think of some stories. So I came in to pitch. I don't know what I thought. I thought it would just be Chris, but it was actually a room full of people. I remember Howard Gordon was there. I think Sarah Charno was there. It was a bit intimidating. And I pitched the 3 ideas, and he shot them all down. And I walked away with my tail between my legs and thought, well, that was kind of embarrassing, a waste of time, and got my hopes up for nothing. And then I think it was about 6 weeks later, he called me and said, I didn't buy any of your ideas, but they were all good. And here's what was good about each one. I'm losing 2 writers, and it turned out these writers were Morgan and Wong, by the way. How would you like to come on staff? Of course. I mean, so I just fell into it. Now, as it turned out, it was a very tough place to work. And if you look at the credits the first couple of years, most writers, it was like 1 episode and out. Like Chris was very, very demanding. And the truth is, I was so green. I just graduated from film school. I had no professional credits. I had 1 feature spec script that he had read. But I think there were 2 things. I think the first lunch I had with Chris and Howard, I pitched what became Endgame. I said, if Mulder's sister came back, a young woman that looks like her, this was before DNA testing, right? How would he know it's not her? And I could just see Chris's mind, like, oh yeah, he liked that idea. And then the second thing is, I don't know why, but the first week he sent me into the editing room, and he said, we have this episode that's not working, go fix it. And of course, now I'm forgetting the name of the episode. It's the one with all the old people in the Excelsis Day. Can you go fix that? And, okay, I'll try. And you can imagine the editors were looking at me like, who is this telling me what to do? But anyway, somehow I did. And then he started sending me like, go to the writer's room and work on this story. And I think I proved myself as a producer before I proved myself as a writer. But it was the perfect show for me. It was exactly what I would have watched as a kid. And there was something I got about it right away. And I think Chris saw that. And so I rose from the bottom level of the writing staff to executive producer after 3 years. And it was just the perfect job for me.
You've said that your favorite episode is Memento Mori. Do you want to briefly explain what happy accident that evolved?
Yeah, so the story is, and some of you who were at breakfast yesterday heard this, is that Memento Mori was in season 4, and Scully had already met these women who'd been abducted and had chips in their necks, and they had cancer. And so at the beginning of each season, we would talk about what the mythology, we didn't use that word back then, it didn't exist, but what the continuing storyline should be about. And I'd said, I think Scully should get cancer because all these other women had it. It seems logical that she would get it as well. And there was somebody there who worked at the studio who said, gee, that feels very soapy and melodramatic for the X-Files. That's not this show. And they just completely dismissed it. I was like, gosh, it really seems right to me, but no. So I let it go. I didn't fight it. And Darren Morgan, who had written so many wonderful episodes, had left the show. He just was tired of being beaten up by notes and the deadline pressure and all that. But he said, I'm going to write 1 episode for you as a freelancer this year. Great. So it was December, and we were exhausted, right? Because you start in June. You can't wait for the Christmas break to get some rest. And Darren's script was supposed to come in 3 days' time. And Darren calls and says, I've got some bad news. It's not coming. Okay, so when are you going to deliver? You're not delivering today. When are you delivering the script? And he goes, no, I'm not delivering the script. I was not able to do it. I don't have a story. There's nothing. I'm not going to be able to write an episode. And we're like, we have to prep a script in 3 days. We have nothing, not even a story idea, nothing. And so okay, that's it. Scully's getting cancer. That decides it. And as it happened, we had this other episode, Leonard Betts, that we'd already devised, where he was a cancer eater. And we said, well, great, she'll find out at the end of Leonard Betts that she's got cancer, and that will lead right into this episode. So Vince Gilligan, John Scheiben, and I, we spent 1 day breaking that story from Memento Mori, plotting it out. And then the next day, the 3 of us took the cards, and each of us wrote a third of the script. And then the third day, which was the first day of prep, we literally just paced and cut the thing together. We didn't even read what each other had written. And we set it down on the table. Here you go. Here's your script to prep. And then we went on Christmas break, and over the break, Chris rewrote that script. And so that's the only one that has 4 writers' names on it. And it's the only one that the 4 of us were nominated for an Emmy for writing. So, but the other thing I like about that episode is it was a mythology episode, but it's the only single part mythology episode of the entire series. And it's emotional. It's not just plot. It's telling you something about Mulder and Scully's relationship and about each of them as people, the way they react to this crisis. And it taught me so much about what was best about the show.
So that's John Gilnitz, that's the 3 of you.
So, yeah, Vince and John and I mean, what happened is, as I said, there was a lot of turnover the first 2 years of the show, but after a while, we got more staff stability. And so Vince stayed, and John stayed, and over time, other writers would stay for multiple seasons. But Vince, John, and I became a rewriting unit. Whenever there was an episode that wasn't working, we would do an uncredited rewrite. And it occurred to us that we should put our names in those scripts so that we would know, even though we got no credit, that was us. That we made this. And so whenever you see an episode that has John Gilnitz, it means...
You fixed it.
Yes. Well, at least we tried to fix it.
So that was your favorite. What's your least favorite?
Oh, gosh. There's many. Gosh, the least favorite that has my name on it would be Medusa. But I hate to say it, because sometimes people go, but I loved that episode. It's like, I didn't. But, I wouldn't want to say some of the others because they're not ones that I wrote. But I would say, like, it relates to what I was saying earlier, the ones where it was like, okay, I kind of get it was trying to be scary or whatever, but it wasn't about anything. There was no point. And that was the thing I realized only by doing the X-Files, 24 episodes a year after year, is you create monsters and you write about aliens, you're departing from literal reality as we know it, right? There's a reason you're doing that. There has to be a point. It has to resonate with you as a human being. And if it does, then a liver-eating mutant is terrifying and stays with you, right? It's touching on some primal fear or some idea about humanity. It's exaggerating it to make a point. And I think that's why shows like The X-Files attract so many smart people, because you know it's about something. It's working on more than one level. And so to me, the least successful episodes of The X-Files are the ones that don't do that don't operate on more than one level.
Is there a plot line that you didn't get to write, that you were dying to write? John and Monica getting together.
Well, I would have loved to have kept doing Reyes and Doggett for years to come. And this is one thing I want to take issue with Annabeth yesterday, because the X-Files did not stop because of Doggett and Reyes. To me, they were an unqualified... They were an unqualified success to me, and I have to say, when they came on the show, I've been doing it for 7 years. And at first, to be honest, when David was cutting back, I said we should just stop the show. Like, you can't do the show without Mulder. And Chris said, look, this is a big hit for Fox. We can all quit. The show's going to keep going, even if we quit. So he said, let's stay and do the best we can. And I said, okay, I'll do that, especially because I owed my career to Chris. And then, surprise, surprise, I loved writing for Doggett and Reyes, and it made it all new, and it was a different way to approach these stories. And we got pilloried a lot by fans online during that period. And I think a lot of it was they were just so invested in Mulder and Scully, which I get, but they weren't recognizing what to me was the inventiveness of those final 2 seasons, which I'm very proud. I'm also very proud that we never took our foot off the pedal. All 9 years, we killed ourselves to make that show as good as we possibly could. We never took it for granted. But to me, what happened was, sorry, I'm not really answering your question, but I want to talk about this. 9/11 is what happened. I think 9/11, it changed the mood of the country, and it changed people's desire to watch a show about government conspiracy. And season 8, people don't know this, the ratings went up. See, when David left, the ratings went up. And people were so curious, what are they going to do without Mulder? And I think, the show worked. It was a different show, but the audience embraced it. And then 9/11 happened, and it was only a few weeks before season 9 premiered. And I was telling Annabeth this last night. I got the New York Times every Sunday, and in the New York Times Magazine, there was a chart, things that are in and out post 9/11. And one of the things that was out was the X-Files. What are they talking about? Why would we be out? And then sure enough, the season premiere, our ratings were like a third lower than they'd ever been. It wasn't like people decided to check out Doggett and Reyes and didn't like it and then left. They just didn't show up. And so I think suddenly the X-Files was out of step with the mood of the country. And that's why after half a season, we could see our ratings were flat, we're never going back up, that we decided to end the show. And it was our decision, because the network would have kept going. But we just felt, in that climate, we were never going to be as meaningful as we were before.
But thank you for redeeming me.
That was not a plan. But yes, I mean, so the show ends because of the times, and there were many other stories that they're always left on the edit room, regardless. But so there's a particular part of that we were discussing yesterday too with the people that went to our breakfast, is that when you decide to end the show, you effectively ended the plot in a way. But you didn't end the emotional arc of these characters, and there's also part of that emotional arc is the hero road of Mulder and Scully. So, what would you describe that hero road for the both of them, where they would end in a satisfying emotional arc for you?
Well, this is the great, frustration for me, is that, even though I want to believe it was a disappointment for most people, it was a genuine attempt to progress Mulder and Scully's relationship and see where they went as characters. And I felt, sadly for me, I wasn't able to participate in the last 2 seasons. And I spent a lot of time over the years thinking about what would happen to Mulder and Scully and where they would go as characters, not just the alien mythology storyline and all that stuff, which I also thought about. So to me, their journey's not done. It doesn't really have an ending. And I think to the season 9 series finale at the time, I didn't realize it until after it was over, until I saw the audience reaction. What we'd done is we tried to wrap up the plot. And that was not satisfying to people, because what people want is, they don't want just the plot resolved. You are all sitting there thinking what should happen with the plot yourselves, right? You have your own opinions about the plot. What we control uniquely, the people who write a television series, is the emotional journey of the character and the meaning of that journey. And if that is rich and satisfying, then you will feel rewarded by watching that show. And if I ever did X-Files again, if it ever did come back, that's what I would want to do. I would want to embrace all of the emotional depth of Mulder and Scully's lives and the sacrifices they've made and the meaning of their journey. And I find them such deeply moving characters, and Milagro to me was one of my favorite episodes. And it's funny because people don't remember this. That was not an episode anybody ever talked about until I Want to Believe. They asked us to do a 5-episode re-release of 5 of our favorite episodes. And I really lobbied to put Milagro on that DVD, and since that point, it's really grown in stature. It's kind of a forgotten episode. But I realized at that point in the series, I had spent more time thinking about Mulder and Scully than any real person in my life, right? And I knew them so well, and I loved them so much because they have so much integrity. They're very romantic characters because they really believe in something and they sacrifice for it. And it's one of my themes that I kind of put in everything I write, which is I don't believe the world rewards you for that. The world does not applaud you, unfortunately, for doing the right thing, for acting in accordance with your conscience, for being moral. In fact, usually you pay a price, right? It's harder. Like the people who are going to cheat or speed or whatever things they're going to do, it's easier to cheat. But if you're not going to cheat, if you're going to play by the rules and live with your conscience, that's a harder road to go by. But it's the better road, right? It's the road that enriches the world, and that's Mulder and Scully to me. And that's why I love them as characters. And you don't see that very often, where it's as convincingly rendered as it is with them, because they are so not alike each other. Their points of view of the world are so opposite, and yet they love and respect each other so completely that it's irresistible.
We often, at least on XFN and like on Twitter, we joke a lot about platonic activity. And this came as a joke to Chris because he kept calling them platonic lovers. Did you ever prescribe to that idea that they were only platonic?
Well, we were very, very stingy about letting them show overt affection to each other the first 5 years of the show. And I remember it was a huge deal in Pusher when Vince wanted them to, I think he actually originally was going to have them kiss or something like that, and we settled on the hands touching at the end of Pusher. Because that was one of the challenges about the X-Files. It was sort of like nothing could really move. It had to stay still, right? Because it was an episodic TV show, and so we were very, very slow. But then after the near kiss in the movie, sorry about that, near kiss, it just became increasingly obvious, like these people have been together now for 5 years, like there's actually something wrong if this relationship doesn't progress after a certain point. It's like, this is weird. We're together for 10 years and we love each other, but we're still just making faces at each other.
It's not platonic, it's surreal.
Yeah, exactly. So at a certain point, we just embraced, you know what, we've got to advance this relationship. But we were afraid it was going to ruin the show and bring the show to an end. But by season 7, I think we fully committed to that idea. And then, of course, you saw in seasons 8 and 9, the coming of William that proved it was no longer a platonic relationship.
Well, since you mentioned William. So, Chris Carter went and did this thing. Who is William's father?
Okay, so I was surprised by seasons 10 and 11 and by the William storyline. It wasn't something I ever had in my head in doing the show. And the events with the cigarette smoking man that Chris references, they were things that we put in there. We often did this where we dropped something not exactly knowing what we were going to do with it later on, but knowing that it was an opportunity later on. And so I haven't talked to him about this specifically, but I think in my mind what he did was, and don't boo me, but what he did was very brave and bold. He didn't want to give you what you were expecting, and he probably knew a lot of people weren't going to like it. But I think he wanted to surprise the audience and show that the show still could do that, had the power to shock you and move you. But I think, so many people are invested in Mulder and Scully's relationship and in William, and I'm not surprised a lot of people don't like that that choice. But to me, in the way I play the narrative of the first 9 seasons, I don't see how Mulder wasn't a father. And I would also say this, I don't think Chris intended season 11 to be the end. And I know it may appear completely definitive, and perhaps it is completely definitive, but you don't really know what would have happened in a season 12. And it wasn't uncommon during the original 9 years of the show where something was decided, you knew 100% what it was, and then the rug would be pulled out from underneath you in the next season. So I'm not convinced that at least some of that wasn't going to be twisted yet again if there'd been another season.
It's slightly related in the closing over of talking about NME, but you like to write women's characters and you enjoy doing it and working with female writers, but it is very noticeable that the X-Files never actually had a particular important, if any, significant presence of women's writers in the writers' room. A lot of crew and a lot of producers, but nothing in the terms of deciding the creative path of the show. At the same time, a lot of the parallels where Scully was put in were referent to either themes of motherhood or her sexual life or things that were kind of like just cornered in that part of her and not the many other things that are part of women's lives or females' lives. Do you think that the show would have been a lot different and didn't need to have that female perspective come in?
Oh, I think it would have been enriched the show, no question. If there had been more women writers, you would have gotten a perspective that there's no question would improve the show. I think X-Files was not alone in that time period in being super male. I mean, I think actually probably 90+% of the shows at that period were super male. It wasn't for a lack of trying. We did have some female writers, but they didn't last. And generally, it was hard to find writers, period, for the X-Files. So believe it or not, we couldn't get people to submit to us. And then the samples they would submit to us were inappropriate for the X-Files because we were not like anything else on TV. None of which is to excuse it, but it was unfortunately a symptom of the time we were writing it. But I don't, having said that, I don't really feel like we did any disservice to Scully's character. I think she's one of the greatest, if not the greatest, female characters in television history. And I think credit goes to Chris. I think right from the beginning, he conceived her as a super strong, smart, independent woman with her own point of view, and who could give as good as she got. And she stayed that way right through the whole show. What was fascinating to me to watch was how Gillian, as a person and an actress, how her power grew. And if you watch the first 4 or 5 seasons, I remember when she's finally giving testimony in front of Congress, like, wow, it's like, look how far Scully's come from, sort of the apprentice to Mulder in the pilot. So I'm really, of the many things I'm proud of the X-Files for, I can't think of anything I'm more proud of than Scully's character.
So, I'm gonna do a little bit of if anyone has questions, please line up, because I'm getting to the end.
And at the very end, please don't leave. I want to just take 2 minutes to do something before you all leave. I want your help to do it, so don't cut out immediately.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Kurt from the Xcast. My question is, talking about themes, and that was something you need to tell the audience about what your themes are going to be for the season. Season 3 seemed to have a fascination with the Second World War. Was that a Chris Carter thing, and what was involved with that, and in using like the rewrites that you needed to do throughout that, so like Paper Maru, Apocrypha, and things like 1931. So that whole section seemed to fascinate with the Second World War. So I was just wondering what your thoughts were and how that all came about, really.
Yeah, Operation Paperclip, that was definitely Chris. He'd read about that and wanted to connect it to the mythology, because it mirrors our use of Nazi scientists after World War II. And putting that in the alien conspiracy context. And then I discovered Unit 731, the Japanese Army, and I didn't know that they'd committed war crimes, as bad as anything the Nazis had done. And it just kind of evolved, emerged organically. It wasn't a plan. And that's how things happen so often in the X-Files. We sort of vaguely knew where we were headed, and then we just trusted ourselves that we would find the pieces to get there as we went. And it was always Chris's philosophy, like, don't wait. If you have a great idea, use it now and trust you'll come up with an even better idea later on. And it was challenging, but it worked for a long time. Thank you.
I would love to share some of your ideas that you said you had for if you could do a third movie or be involved in the revival. What are some things you thought you would like to do, like an invasion or something else?
Well, a lot of the things that Chris and I talked about are sort of in conflict now with what happened in the last 2 seasons. So I don't really know how I would move forward sort of the plot architecture that.
If you could do like an alternate reality starting from season 9.
Well, the truth is, never say never. I'm not 100% convinced that the X-Files is indeed over. I know Gillian's not doing the show anytime soon, but that doesn't mean it won't happen again. And I honestly believe these characters and the actors that play them are so extraordinary. I don't really believe it's over. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, but I don't think that's the last time you see Mulder and Scully. So I don't really want to give away what I would do, because part of me thinks I still may have a chance to do it.
So going off what you were saying about Scully earlier, I am doing the Scully Effect panel right after you. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about how you feel given what Scully did and didn't do in season 11, which is she didn't get to do a single autopsy. We didn't really see her in her element. They actually threw her in the trash. The way that she was dismissive of William after having for so long been an advocate of how she gave him up and how terrible that was. And I'm adopted, so as an adopted person, I felt that was very true to her. And then suddenly in season 11, she didn't do anything for most of the season. And I feel like a lot of that is kind of like what Avi said, which is there were no women in the writer's room, and then there continue to be no women in the writer's room, even though I'm sure that now in Hollywood, a lot of young women would have loved to get their hands on Mulder and Scully and write for them. So I wanted to kind of get your opinion on why this amazing female character that we've been given and had all loved, and then suddenly it felt like that was kind of ripped away.
I have no greater insight into it than you do, because I wasn't there, and I really, I don't have any. You probably know more about how the writing of that season worked than I do, because
I do not know.
I really don't. I don't know. I looked at it from the outside like you did, probably. I don't know what to say other than I was surprised, just like
You were
everybody
surprised,
else.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wish you'd been involved.
Me too.
Because you said
Me too.
some amazing things, and I really, as part of the fandom for the last 25 years, I really appreciated hearing you say all of that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
How you doing? Thank you for everything you've done for all of us here. We appreciate every minute you've ever put into this show, and it meant the world to everyone here you see. Earlier you touched on the later seasons with Annabeth and Doggett, of course. Was there one specific episode or storyline that if the show had continued, and forget the later seasons, but if you had continued just from that point that you would have liked to have written, or somewhere you would have liked to go on, anything in your mind?
Well, I feel like the moment we're living in right now, the X-Files really could speak to this moment right now. I mean, I look around me at the world and I think the world's gone mad.
Yeah, everyone agrees.
Yeah, and I just think, you know, the X-Files is a perfect vehicle for talking about all of this. And I've always felt like the X-Files is just the most beautiful idea for a TV show, because it could go on forever. Because it's just about, you know, believer, skeptic, and about what we don't understand about the world, the mystery of the universe around us. And even if you're an atheist, you acknowledge there's mystery to life.
Of course.
And so, if I were writing X-Files, I would want to write about nationalism and Trump and chaos and darkness, and that's the thing. You know, X-Files. People go, oh, I can't watch that show. It's too scary. X-Files is so hopeful.
Yeah.
Right? It gives you hope. And I always felt like the darker it is, the brighter the light is. You know, when you see the light, it's so bright because you're facing the darkness. And there's a lot of darkness right now that I think X-Files could talk about. So.
That's excellent. Thank you for your thoughts on that.
Thank you so much. I'm curious what you think about, or how much influence the fandom or online response communities has on showrunners, like especially thinking about some of the more recent reactions to like Game of Thrones finale. And you know, obviously we didn't have Twitter at the level, you know, back when the X-Files premiered that we do now. How much or how little influence does that have on showrunners?
I think it has a lot of influence now. I was saying at breakfast yesterday, I used to go on, even when the show was on, you know, relatively early days of the internet, and I would read all the comments every Friday night and then Sunday night. And I was one of the few, you know, like, I know Vince and Chris, it's like, it was too painful to go on and read. And it was painful, because even when they loved the show, there would be a significant minority that absolutely hated it. And of course, those are the comments that stick with you. You know, you get 100 praises and then you get one pan, and it hurts for months. But I couldn't resist. I was so curious what people were thinking about it. And I found it instructive, because it was amazing how smart the audience was, how they picked up on things, and I wanted to see were they understanding what we were saying. Especially with the X-Files, because there would be clues we would drop in season 2, and then we wouldn't pick it up again until season 4. Did they remember? Yes, they did. And so I found it very helpful. And there was even one point, I went to a convention in Minneapolis, and somebody said, you know, when are you going to pick up on the death of Scully's sister? We dropped that entirely. And I'm like, oh my God, she's right, we did. And on the plane back, I outlined Piper Maru, literally, because of this fan asking me this question. Like, we hadn't followed up on the character journey.
And he also put Layla Harrison in.
Yes, Layla Harrison, yes, which was named after a fan who unfortunately passed away, but that was like me trying to include the fans in the narrative of the show in a way. And that final scene, if you all remember that episode, Alone, it was like she's in the hospital bed, and it's like a fan talking to Mulder and Scully, asking about all these things that don't make sense in the show. So I think it's a really, really valuable resource, but it is a resource. And I think the danger is that you start writing to that one audience, and it may be your most devoted, attentive audience, but it's only a small portion of your audience, and you've got to pay attention to the vast viewership, which are watching at a different level of attention. But I look at shows like, you know, X-Files. You know, I think our series finale was considered, you know, underwhelming to a lot of people. Lost, and now Game of Thrones, and I think we were all guilty to some degree or another of focusing on plot more than character and meaning. And I look at Vince and Breaking Bad, and to me, that was perfect. You know, to me, that's how you do it. That was the right thing.
Brace for this one.
Hello. So a few years back on the Big Light mailbag, someone emailed in and asked you about Hermanum.
Someone.
And no, it wasn't you. And the flashbacks and like how they fit into the timeline. And you'd like tried to answer but hadn't really come up with anything. You
Yes.
said one day you would tell us like where they fit into the timeline, and it is today that day.
You know, because I tried to answer it very offhandedly, and then I don't know if it was you, but somebody's like, no, that's wrong, Frank, because of
For
this.
these
I'm like,
reasons.
oh yeah, you're right. And so I realized, you know, there was a time when I had it all in my head. That time is gone, and I need to go back and watch those episodes. And if I did, I'm sure I could tell you what I was
You should
thinking,
go back and
but I
watch
haven't done it.
Thank you.
I want to ask you about the original series blooper reels, because I think they're really great, and they were never released in any real capacity. I mean, they were just bootlegged on YouTube, and I just wanted to know if you had any insight into when those were shown and why those were never, like, included on any of the season releases with other features.
I remember I tried to put them on the I Want to Believe DVD release, but they weren't on there. I thought I did, but maybe they never made it on there. I don't know. But,
Well, the movies had one in the recent seasons, but like
Right.
seasons 1 through 9
yeah.
didn't.
So what happened was the editors would collect the bloopers throughout the season as they happened and put them in a bin. And then at the end of each season, one of the editors would cut them together into a reel that we would show at the wrap party. And then we saved them. But yeah, they still exist. Fox still has those reels. And as I say, I know I tried to release them, and if they weren't put on that DVD, then there must have been a reason.
I think they were reserving them for the Blu-rays, and then they never got uppressed. And
That's too bad. That should happen.
They're on YouTube. You can see them.
Yeah,
It's just,
but it'd be nice to
Yeah.
higher quality. Well, I'm seeing Chris on Tuesday. I'll raise that with him.
Oh, thank you.
Hello, Frank. First of all, I don't know if I have a question, more of a thing to say. With Fight the Future, I just wanted to say I dragged my dad to see that movie probably 3 times during Father's Day weekend. And I'm not sure what parts of it you wrote, but when we walked out of that movie, I told my dad, I just want to find a guy who's going to love me as much as he loves her. And that was when I had just really gotten into the X-Files, because I didn't get into it right at the beginning. I was sick for Thanksgiving one year, and they used to have the marathons on FX, I think it was, and I stayed home and I watched it the year before, and I really got into it. But anyway, I just wanted to thank you for that, and to thank you for the show that you wrote, when you were writing it, not the last, whatever that was that we just finished watching. And for a show like that I was able to share with my dad and with my friends that I made through it, and for writing those characters that you know how to write. And when you see Chris on Tuesday, you can tell him that you know how to write them a lot better than some people. And because we're not bitter, like Avi says, we're not bitter at all. But thank you so much for writing that. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks. I just have to put in a word of defense, Chris. I mean, because you guys, of course, are entitled to feel how you feel about the last 2 seasons. But the truth is, I mean, he not only created the show and all these great characters, but he hired everybody else that made the show what it is, and insisted that all of us do our best work. And I don't deny you're right to be frustrated with some things, but gosh, my appreciation and gratitude to him is unending. So.
before we go on the next one, Amy, do you mind that we borrow 10 minutes from your panel?
If I can borrow 10 minutes from the next one.
We'll make it quick.
I'll try. By the way, that's one of my friends. We met. There's 2 of us here. We met as online fans. We're part of the OPSI, if anybody else was. And we've been friends for 20 years.
Wow.
So, and in person, doing all this kind of stuff. So, thank you guys for that. That means a lot. It's changed my life. But my question is more related to the first thing you said about your background and having moved around a lot as a kid and being kind of an army brat, right? So how did that influence Scully's character and her character arc from coming from the same background? Even though you weren't there at the beginning, you came into that already set.
Yeah. I mean, I look at Scully as an incredibly self-reliant person. And, one of the things that touches me about both of them, but, people don't think about it, like Scully has sacrificed as much or more than Mulder has sacrificed. And she always gets up. And she never feels sorry for herself. And, she's as smart as anybody could be, and poised and brave, and just, it's a model for how I would like to be. Like, I always looked at Scully as like the smartest person in the audience, Mulder, to tell him that he's wrong, to challenge him. And the fact that Mulder loved her for that made me love him, right?
I'm all sweet now, thank you.
Okay, the last question, because we have 2 more things.
I hopefully this is a good question. Thank you again for everything you've done on the show. The basic premise of the show is Mulder, the believer, versus Scully, skeptic. So I'm curious who you identify with more, Mulder or Scully?
Well, it's interesting because I've always been a skeptic. You know, I'm not a religious person, and I came into the show completely a skeptic. But then it was through conventions, through seasons 2 through 5 of the show, I met so many people who had either experiences involving alien abduction or other supernatural experiences, and these people were not crazy, right? They were not. They were very credible people, and also doing research for the show. And so I became a humble skeptic. I'm still a skeptic, but I have to acknowledge there's something to this, and we don't understand what it is. My brother's a physicist, engineer, and studied physics. And he was telling me, this is some years ago, that physicists now believe that something like 70 to 80% of the world around us we can't perceive because we're human beings. And our 5 senses don't allow us to see all this reality that's all around us. And I thought, well, that's got to be it then. All this stuff that we interpret as aliens and ghosts, it's like we are limited by our perception. That's why we can't understand what it is. And that's the best explanation I've been able to come up with so far.
I love it. Thank you.
Cool. So, thank you guys. We have one last thing to show you guys.
Oh yeah, and I want to do something really quickly. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So I had a website that I shut down because I have this production company, Big Light, and that sort of took over. But with Avi, I've been working on the website for the last 6 months, and I used to have this mailbag where I answered fans' questions, and there's a lot of X-Files stuff in that mailbag, which Roy was just alluding to earlier, and that's coming back. So it'll be up sometime in the next few weeks.
Yeah.
So
Let's say 2 weeks now that I don't have extra sports. So Roy, can you do?
it just shows you what it looks like.
This is just a sneak peek. We're putting like a lot of Easter eggs in there, so you're gonna have fun.
I would like act like this is a rock concert, okay? So be really enthusiastic. I would like to record 4 brief messages, okay? And I'm going to post these, and when I see Chris, I will share one of them with him on Tuesday. So if you don't mind, as loud as you all can, with as much sincerity as you can, if you could just say, thank you for the X-Files, Chris, at the count of 3. I'll video that, and I will share it with him on Tuesday. Is that all right?
Yeah!
Okay, hold this up. And on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you, Chris! X-Files, Chris!
those messages to you. So if we could just say, we love you, Robert. Robert! Okay. 1, 2, 3. We love you, Robert! Okay. We love you, David. 1, 2, 3. We love you, David! And we love you, Jillian. 1, 2, 3. We love you, Jillian! You're the best fan.
Thank you guys. Thank you.